Hey everybody, it's James Lindsay and you're listening to the new Discourses podcast. And what we're going to do today is something a little bit more back to the roots of what I usually do. We're going to talk about something on the left. I'm going to read to you a little bit out of a book that's kind of timely, at least in the circles that I run in. This book is called The Little Book of Race and Restorative Justice: Black Lives, Healing, and U.S. Social Transformation. And it's written by one Fania E. Davis. That's F-A-N-I-A. Fania E. Davis. That is Angela Davis's sister. And so you can tell by the title and by the author that this book is going to be whack. As a matter of fact, this book sucks. This is probably the third stupidest book I've ever read in my entire life. Although it's been a few years since I read some of these other truly idiotic critical race theory books. The two that I'm thinking of that are stupider than this book are by Martine Rothblatt, who is a trans advocate and on the board of the Mayo Clinic, or at least was, maybe still is, billionaire creator of Sirius XM Radio. I understand quite a brilliant and capable guy who pretends he's a woman and has written two batshit crazy books that are about sex and sexuality and gender. Sex and gender, really. These books are The Apartheid of Sex and From Transgender to Transhuman. And they are truly remarkably dumb books. But this book is right up there in the running for dumbness. I don't think it's as bad as those. However, it's really profoundly bad. I'm not going to read a ton of it. I'm going to read most of the fourth chapter and try to give you some color. As you heard, the book is about restorative justice. And what made me want to do this podcast is, we've got a new Department of Education right now, and I am very interested in seeing that Department of Education take on the issue of restorative justice. And I don't think it gets talked about enough. And then secondly, I just did a Moms for Liberty University book club about critical race theory, about my book, Race Marxism. And at the end of it, I found out that Moms for Liberty University, M4LU, is spending March talking about race and it's spending March talking about restorative justice. That's the theme, the educational theme of March for M4LU. So I thought, what a good time to throw some more information into the ring about restorative justice. Now, I think restorative justice is an incredibly important topic. I think the best book on the subject to read and most important book on the subject to read is by, Andrew Pollack, is that right? And Max Eden. It's called Why Meadow Died. I will put a link to that in my little write-up. Why Meadow Died explains the Parkland shooting in Florida and lays the blame for that tragic and horrific school shooting directly at the feet of kind of two broad policy decisions that were experimented with in that part of Florida. And those are the inclusive classroom policy and the restorative justice disciplinary program. As a matter of fact, in Why Meadow Died, they make the case, and I've talked to Max Eden about this previously, they make the case that is that Brevard County? I can't remember. But that district in Florida was basically the test case for restorative justice, and it ends in one of the most horrific school shootings in American history, where every one of the kids, the second they heard pop, 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 they heard the gunshot, they knew who pulled the trigger. They knew exactly what was going on, because there was this kid who should not have been in the school, but was. This obvious problem kid, this obvious psychopath kid who should not have been in the school, but was. And why? Because of those two sets of policies. The inclusive classroom meant that somebody who had certain different kinds of disabilities, including psychological issues, had to be included in the mainstream curriculum, the mainstream classrooms. You have to make every effort that you can to fully integrate, which this comes out of disability policy, which can be straightforward or it can be controversial. it is often to the benefit of kids who have certain learning disabilities to be as mainstreamed as possible and not cordoned off into some other place. And it is sometimes a true challenge, both for the teacher and for the rest of the class and for the student being integrated themselves. So inclusive classroom policies, being too inclusive, and we're all used to that word, enabled this school district to include too many students, including one who had quite the alarming psychological profile. I'm not an expert in that. I encourage you to read Why Meadow Died to see what it has to say about it. But then the restorative justice program in particular is what they finger. And if I got the name right, if it's Andrew Pollack, I'd have to look that up. If I have the name right, because I know Max, so unfortunately I give him credit for the book. He is one of the fathers of one of the children who was shot at the school. And Meadow's father, I think, as a matter of fact. And that is why Meadow died. And they put the finger directly on restorative justice policies, because with restorative justice, you're not supposed to use traditional punitive discipline methods in the classroom. You're not supposed to suspend people. You're not supposed to expel people. You're not supposed to send kids to alternative school if they're a true danger. You're not supposed to have all kinds of approaches that are deemed, as we will hear in the Little Book of Race and Restorative Justice, as part of the so-called school to prison pipeline, which is this leftist mythology that they've created to explain that disciplining students in schools somehow leads them into a pipeline into going into prison, because once you get suspended, now your whole educational process is falling apart and therefore you're going to end up in prison. It's almost like they can't uninvert the world. The left has an inverted world. They can't uninvert it and think maybe a lot of the kids who are getting in trouble a lot at school, who are a small percentage of the kids at the school, are the ones who are heading for prison anyway because there's something wrong. No. We're going to make sure that we're going to integrate them differently. So restorative justice involves healing circles and talking it out. And the idea is that you're supposed to restore the community. So if I do you wrong, you and I are supposed to sit down, maybe with members of the community as witnesses and accountability partners, and we're supposed to talk it out. And I'm supposed to make you feel better about how I wronged you, and you're supposed to tell me how it made you feel, and we're supposed to knit the community back together. This idea of this like communal healing for wrongdoing. It's almost like this very peculiar, either tribal, which we'll talk about because it's very obviously what they're appropriating. Speaking of cultural appropriation from the left, it's this very weird, like tribal, but also like fantasyland communal approach that sort of distorts what the Catholic ritual of confession is supposed to achieve. In confession, you go and you confess to the priest. The priest tells you what you need to repent for and what prayers you need to say in order to do some healing for that for yourself spiritually. And if you go through that process, the deal is the church is supposed to welcome you back as a member in good standing. So there's this kind of de facto community healing. I don't know if the social psychology that I read about this over 15 years ago, I was going to say over a decade ago now, is correct or not, but it was at least hypothesized that the way that this works is that when you go through a process of confession and then repentance, recognizing that what you did was wrong, and then the community tacitly accepts the fact that you've now repented and forgives you and brings you back into the fold, then psychologically it primes you to try to stay on the good side of the law. Again, because there's a psychological tendency when you decide that you just forget it, I can't be good. Right? I'm bad. I can't be good. That you'll just start to not care about upholding moral principle as well as you did otherwise. So when you have this forgiveness process, there's this accountability. It's almost like you have this weird leftist fantasyland interpretation of tribal dynamics on repentance, forgiveness, that is supposed to be like the leftist replacement to the Catholic confession ritual, if that's a psychological dynamic. And that's supposed to be how we deal with discipline problems in the school. Now, what they never talk about is that in a tribe, if you were a true problem member of a tribe, they'd throw you out. they would expel you. Excommunication in religion, they'll pitch you right out. They'll exile you or kill you. I mean, it was a bit more brutal. It wasn't like this la kumbaya universe in a lot of these situations if somebody was a true problem to the tribe. But what they also don't talk about is the fact that communists benefit strongly, at least on this side of the revolution, from encouraging bad and disruptive behavior, from encouraging and freeing criminals. So I want to read a little bit from this book. Unfortunately, being that this is the little book of race and restorative justice, and I think there's another book that's more geared toward the history of restorative justice, of restorative justice. This book doesn't talk all that much about what restorative justice is. I'll give you a little taste of it. But I want to talk about the chapter 4 in this book, primarily where it's about how it's to be integrated into schools, and it's kind of very interesting. But I want to read to you this little segment, just a little paragraph or so, couple paragraphs from the very beginning, maybe a couple paragraphs from the second chapter, where she's trying to tell you what restorative justice are, although she's not very interested. Remember, this is Fania Davis. So she spends most of the first chapter actually telling this, in my opinion, likely to be extremely apocryphal or biased history of her sister and all of how inspiring her sister was. That's Angela Davis, who was this hardened communist who she tells the story claiming that Angela Davis was wrongly imprisoned because firearms in her name were used in the kidnapping of a federal judge, but allegedly Angela wasn't there, and blah, 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 blah. And then there's all these, whatever. She's basically, I'm Angela Davis's sister, so you have to listen to me. She also points out, and I don't have any, pieces bookmarked where I can read this directly to you. She just points out repeatedly that she's a communist. So if you wonder who's advocating for restorative justice in your schools, it's communists. Okay, so let me read this little bit to you. She says, shortly after returning from Africa and completing the PhD, I learned about restorative justice, a justice that seeks not to punish, but to heal. So this is some commie gobbledygook from the get-go, right? As if healing is just always magically going to be able to work out. A justice, according to K. Pranis, that is not about getting even, but about getting well. Doesn't it sound nice? Doesn't it sound good? A justice that seeks to transform broken lives, relationships, and communities. Transform. Now, we're okay with transforming broken lives, maybe broken relationships, sure, and transforming broken communities, but that transform word is a word that we watch out for, because as you're going to hear, there's more to it than that. This is a really telling little passage. A healing justice. Sorry, I left that out. I left a little bit out there. A justice that seeks to transform broken lives, relationships, and communities rather than shatter them further. So the usual this or that straw man that they always use, we call that an affordance trap in political warfare. It's you either have this restorative justice that heals or something that shatters communities and relationships further. A justice that seeks reconciliation rather than deepening of conflict. A healing justice rather than a harming justice. Learning about this new but ancient, how dialectical, right? And you're saying, James, you don't have to use the D word. You don't have to say dialectical. Hold on to your hats, kids. Learning about this new but ancient justice marked a climax in my own years-long movement toward wholeness. It provoked an epiphany, integrating my inner warrior. So you hear the Gnostic language here, right? It awakened her to something new. It was a healing justice rather than a harming justice, and learning about this new but ancient justice marked a climax in my own years-long movement toward wholeness. Dialectical. It provoked an epiphany, integrating my inner warrior with my inner healer. Dialectical. And uniting the opposites within. Dialectical. Fire, water, solar, lunar, masculine, feminine. Since that sentence is just so crazy, I'm just going to read it again without my little commentary. Learning about this new but ancient justice marked a climax in my own years-long movement toward wholeness. It provoked an epiphany, integrating my inner warrior with my inner healer, and uniting the opposites within: fire-water, solar-lunar, and masculine-feminine. Restorative justice allowed me to integrate these hitherto disparate parts. That's dialectical, by the way. I did not have to choose one and renounce the other. At last, I could be all of me. Doesn't that sound like just so great? There's this secret knowledge about yourself that you get to come to, but you couldn't get there before because it required you to understand opposing and opposite parts of yourself that you couldn't reconcile. But somehow restorative justice unlocks an epiphany, an awakening, a spiritual awakening into who you really are as a warrior healer. My primary purpose of this book, she tells us, is to invite restorative justice practitioners to cultivate a heightened racial justice consciousness. And that's what I wanted to say earlier, so I'm going to have to read that again. Unfortunately, because this is the little book of race and restorative justice, not the book of the history of social restorative justice, which I will reference for you, and maybe we can dig it up. I haven't read it yet. I don't know if I will, but you might be interested. This is the book of race and restorative justice. This book is, rather than being terribly descriptive on what restorative justice is, this book is a struggle session to make it about CRT. That's the usual MO. This book was published in 2019, by the way. It's fairly new. This is a book that's meant to take the existing, already batshit crazy leftist approaches to restorative justice that, whatever its origins, and there are good arguments to make that it had decent origins, to co-opt those into leftism, and then to co-opt them further by saying you're racist until you do it our way. It's a typical program with all of these leftists, that they're actually doing a series of bitch moves that allow them to get in positions of power to control things. People don't know how to respond to that. Oh, we're trying to do restorative justice. We care about this, and all these black kids are in trouble at school all the time, and we think it's a big problem. Yeah, it's because you're racist. That's how they work. Oh my God, how do we fix that? What do we do? Well, you give us all the power, and we'll guide the field, and all these grifters that do CRT take over because they've called something racist, so now they get to control it. CRT was born out of the critical legal studies movement the exact same way, by the way. 1984 or 5, I think. It's given as both dates in the Big Red Book, the Critical Race Theory, the Key Writings that Form the Movement that Kimberly Crenshaw put together. It's given with both dates, so I don't know which one's right, but it doesn't matter. At the conference for the Critical Legal Studies program, which had gotten very big at that point, a National Critical Legal Studies Conference, they finally had a panel of what were going to be critical race theorists who got up on stage and just called them all racists and said the whole movement was racist because it wasn't admitting black voices or whatever enough. That, you know, the standard trick with this point. It's exhausting to even talk about or think about. And the whole critical legal studies movement, which is super left, melted down over this accusation of racism they didn't know how to handle. Next thing you know, CLS basically dies. Critical legal studies basically dies. It becomes fringe and small and weak, and the conference falls all apart. Everything's not going well. And in 1989, a few years later, critical race theory emerges out of the ashes after having burned it all down. But this book is doing the same thing. That's its real purpose. So a primary purpose of this book is to invite restorative justice practitioners to cultivate a heightened racial justice consciousness, and racial justice activists to embrace a greater healing consciousness. So more dialectics. And you're like, James, you have to keep saying that. I have to belabor points sometimes, y'all. Through the coupling of what I refer to as warrior and healer, we developed a capacity to fulfill the promise of both the racial justice and restorative justice movements, disrupt the school to prison pipeline, interrupt the new Jim Crow of mass incarceration, transform the historical harm that drives present-day state-sanctioned police violence against people of color, and ultimately, in my view, take the next step on the evolutionary journey of reimagining what it means to be human. And I think it's important that we start with that. So these people are communists. She says she's a communist. This is coming from a communist perspective, and in line with the Communist Project, which is also in line with the United Nations Project, we have this little gem that it is ultimately, in her view, meant to take the next step on the evolutionary journey of reimagining what it means to be human. Right, so here's just real quick to make my point. The page before, I'm just going to start kind of at a random spot and finish. I don't want to read much. This was the power of the people writ large. I had already considered myself a socialist, but was so impressed by the passion, theory, practice, and organizing skills of the black communists who led the campaign to free my sister that I joined the Communist Party. That's who we're talking about. So why do I call this book so dumb? Chapter 2, Ubuntu, the indigenous ethos of restorative justice. So it's always this cultural appropriation bullshit. So she goes over to Africa, she appropriates their tribal concept of Ubuntu, which is supposed to mean that, I don't know, I'll read what she says. I am because we are, and we are because I am, expresses the universal African core belief that the individual exists only in relationship to the collective. This communitarian view, P.S. the woke right calls themselves not communists but communitarians. This communitarian view is known as Ubuntu in Southern Africa's, so if you're a Linux fan, this is where that word comes from. In Southern African Zulu, I don't even know how to say, Xhosa we'll say, Tswanza, Venda, and other African traditions that she's culturally appropriating. Also translated to mean a person is a person through their relationships. How dialectical. Ubuntu emphasizes humans' inter-identity and interrelationality with all dimensions of existence. This is one of the reasons, by the way, that they push all this indigenous stuff all the time. A lot of the indigenous concepts, which are suited to fit in a local tribal environment, actually echo socialism. Remember, Marx's idea was that communism fully realizes the global elevation, the reimagining of human society, actually, evolution. The idea was that you were going to take what works as a tribal communist model at the lowest stage of human development, according to Marx, and have it as a global, high-tech, advanced society with all the benefits retained from capitalism, but with all, so it's dialectical, right? The synthesis of the savage with the civilized, just like Rousseau saw the savages made to live in cities. Marx believed you were going to be able to somehow retain all of the benefits of advanced society while having a global tribe that operates the way that a extended family tribe operates. This is why, and I did a little podcast about this once, you had E.O. Wilson, the biologist, a famous biologist that studied bees and wasps and ants, saying that communism is a great idea, but the wrong species. And I felt really bad because as soon as I realized, I didn't realize it immediately. Oh, it's profound. No, it's not profound. It's wrong. Each anthill or each wasp nest or each hornet hive, whatever you want, beehive, whatever you want, each one of those is a family. It's an extended family. And they're at war with the other ones. It's exactly like human tribes spread out and at war with one another. It is not a global universe. The idea of communism is that you can take something that works in an extended family and force the entire population to do it. And the way you force them to do it is by transforming what it means to be human. And that's exactly what this book is about. But I've digressed. But this is why they are so interested in indigenous stuff, is because a lot of these indigenous philosophies that they go take from sound and operate in a way that is reflective of the goals of socialism, because the goal of socialism is the impossible goal of taking a global society and transforming it into what works as a local tribal phenomenon. Turns out there are trade-offs. If you want to have the benefits of a huge global society that can generate things like rocket ships and iPhones and huge economic benefits and people not starving to death in a bad winter, as it turns out, you have to sacrifice the we share everything as everybody in our extended family tribe. So where did I leave off here? Because we're talking about Ubuntu. Yeah, whatever. So as translated to mean a person, also translated to mean A person is a person through the relationships. Ubuntu emphasizes humans' inter-identity, so group identity, right? And interrelationality, that's a fancy way of saying what the woke call positionality, with all dimensions of existence, other people, places, land, animals, waters, air, and so on. So you can cram the whole environmental horseshit movement into that right there. Ubuntu affirms not only our inherent interrelatedness, but also the resulting responsibility we bear to one another. In other words, you got to go be socialist, right? Of course. Also, that sentence didn't end there. There was a comma. But also the resulting responsibility we bear to one another, flowing precisely from our deep connection. As the Lakota Sioux put it, so we were in Africa and now we're in South Dakota, or North Dakota, I guess. Some word in Sioux language that I'm not going to butcher. In other words, we are all relatives. We are all here on earth to learn to take care of one another. As relatives living within the continuum of creation, it is our responsibility to live in right relationship and present to one another and the earth in all ways that promote healing and flourishing for all. This is just crackpot religion. There's no other way to say it. Neither tyranny of community nor extreme of individualism. Ubuntu invokes a dialectical unity of opposites. That's why James was harping on it, because he knew it's in the book. This is a page later. In the African worldview, so we appropriate from the tribal where this concept could work in local, low-level, not advanced family groupings. We appropriate in the African worldview, interdependent. Remember, the woke view is that the civilized world, what do they call it, Eurocentric, or white supremacist world, is excluding those other views out of the fear that they are actually superior, that they threaten the hegemony of white power or European power or whatever, not because they don't work in the context of a large society made up of people who are not directly kin, who do not know one another. In other words, a society filled with strangers who live in cities and things like that. So in the African worldview, independence is inseparable from interdependence. And individuality expands from being solitary to being in solidarity. See how this is what I was saying. They appropriate the concept from the tribal context or the Africa or the Sioux or whatever and turn it into socialist gobbledygook. They turn it into a socialist expression. And this is probably just straight bullshit. But even if it's not straight bullshit, it's a category error. It's something that applies within one context that would not apply in the global large society, an advanced society. It just doesn't do it. Morality, fairness, and justice are not narrowly construed based on the primacy of individual rights, but rather based on a strong sense of one's connection and responsibility to others. Now, that's fantastic in a small tribe, I suppose, and they have some hierarchy that governs it. But what happens in, our society, if you try to do that, is a bunch of damn grifters show up and say, we're the ones who end up speaking. This is a recipe for a social order or hierarchy that gets colonized by cluster B psychopaths and manipulators and grifters. Why? Because they're going to show up and talk endlessly about how you're not meeting your responsibilities to others, meaning themselves. And they're going to put it all in terms of some, here's this community, here's this person, here's this thing that's not being met. And you have a strong sense of connection and responsibility to others. And what's going to happen is the grifters who come in with this crap are the ones who are going to run everything. And what a surprise. This is written by Fania Davis, who is Angela Davis's sister. Ubuntu unites the self and the world in a web of reciprocal relations. So this is the communist playbook right here. It is one's caring relationship with others that enhances their humanity and self-worth. Now, I'm not going to say that Ubuntu, this African concept, tribal concept, that Ubuntu is the communist playbook. I'm going to say that the communists co-opt these concepts exactly like I've already explained, and I'm not going to explain again. They co-opt these concepts, they take something that may or may not work, but we'll say that it does work fairly well in certain conditions, namely tribal conditions, which are extended units of kin, family, and then they try to expropriate that into a global socialist order or even a national socialist order, and it just doesn't work. There is no more blatant cultural appropriation than this. And then they go around and tell everybody that when it doesn't work that they're bad people because it didn't work. If one's caring relationship with other, it is one's relationship. Let me start that sentence again. It is one's caring relationship with others that enhances their humanity and self-worth. It's just a moral extortion racket. Popularized by Archbishop Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela, Ubuntu became part of the international lexicon during the transition from apartheid to Western democracy in South Africa in the mid-1990s. Bold move holding up South Africa as the pathway for how we should go. Okay, let's pretend that what they actually instituted is Ubuntu. How are they doing now? Holy crap. The Boers have literal refugee status in the United States because the state can now confiscate their land, sell it out from under them at whatever price they want, and decide that they historically benefited in a way that was racist and give them nothing for it. The state can literally just come in and expropriate the Boers from their land at this point, besides how wonderfully dangerous the place is. So yeah, great example. Ubuntu, it served as the philosophical cornerstone of South Africa's internationally renowned restorative justice-based truth and reconciliation process. Yeah, it's just worked out really well, hasn't it? Restorative justice pioneer Howard Zehr links restorative justice to the Judeo-Christian concept of shalom. This is their trick where they say, hey, look, this value that I'm trying to force you to adopt is like a value you already have, so you'll misunderstand it in terms of your own values. Which, quote, emphasizes right relationships between individuals, between groups of people, between people and the earth, and between people and the divine, and declares an allegiance to respecting life in all its forms. It encourages us to see the nurturing of this sacred relational web as our ultimate calling. Well, the Judeo-Christian view is that you're to do this voluntarily. God does not compel you to do it, and the community isn't going to compel you to do it very much. So you have to do this voluntarily to be in right standing with the community. Consonant, she tells us, with African and other indigenous communitarian values, restorative justice is profoundly relational and emphasizes bringing together everyone affected by wrongdoing to address needs and responsibilities and to heal the harm to relationships and community to the degree possible, which isn't always very much, P.S. Like the kid at Parkland. No amount of restorative justice was going to stop him from picking up a gun and shooting kids at school. No amount is going to fix his deranged psychopathy. Nothing was going to do. No restorative justice. I'm not going to say there's absolutely no intervention that could have done something, maybe some kind of mental health. I doubt it. But there is no restorative justice like, hey, psychopath, come here. See the people that you're hurting. Doesn't that make you feel empathy? Whoops, you don't have any effing empathy. You're a psychopath. It's maybe not your fault, but you don't have any. So this isn't going to work, and the psychopath's going to be sitting there laughing. 0.8% of the population is clinically psychopathic. 0.8%. You cannot fix it. This is called essential psychopathy. You cannot treat it. They do not have empathy, and they're going to laugh that they just got away with whatever they got away with without getting in trouble, even though they got caught, because they just have to go through this stupid performance of a restorative justice. Nothing in restorative justice would have stopped a kid like that from eventually showing up at school with a gun and doing what he did. To the degree possible, she tells us. While often mistakenly considered only a reactive response to harm, restorative justice is also a proactive relational strategy to create a culture of connectivity where all members of a community thrive and feel valued. Well, thriving and feeling valued sound great, but that's really not the point when you're talking about people getting shot, because they're not thriving anymore. And the goal is not to make a psychopath that's going to shoot up a school feel valued. That's just not part of the goal. But all that jibber jabber, there's a lot of fancy words, right? Restorative justice is also a proactive relational strategy to create a culture of connectivity. The hell does that mean? Let me tell you what that means. What that means is you're going to do a bunch of the stuff we've all come to associate with the BS unconscious bias or implicit bias training, with all this woke gobbledygook where we're going to do proactive. We're going to sit down and we're going to talk about it. We're going to have courageous conversations. We're going to sit down and we're going to work out our differences beforehand so that we don't end up having fights and battles and whatever else. The whole book is this stupid. I'm not going to read much of it. I'm going to skip to chapter 4, Race, Restorative Justice in Schools. Every chapter starts with some stupid indigenous symbol with some stupid explanation of what it's supposed to mean. And this chapter goes on after that to tell of a bunch of stories like, I'm not going to read all of them, but one like this. A 4-year-old black boy in a California preschool is suspended for theft for retrieving his bag of Skittles that the principal confiscated. Well, I don't know why the kid got in trouble. The principal confiscated his Skittles. The kid goes back and gets his bag of Skittles. He probably went into the principal's office or broke into the principal's office, grabbed his bag of Skittles. Granted, he's 4. There's a way to deal with this, right? But he gets suspended as a result of doing something he clearly shouldn't. Was it the right call? I don't know. Disciplining 4-year-olds is not exactly easy to figure out the right call. We can just go through. There's 10. Let me see. 1, 2, 3. 4, 5, 6, 7 of these stories, these little tiny little windows into how unfair it is. And of course, we got to throw in the race part on pretty much everything. A 14-year-old black boy is arrested on charges of disorderly conduct. Well, was he being disorderly? For stealing a 65-cent carton of milk. Well, did he steal it? Even though he was entitled to it as a participant in the school's free lunch program. So it sounds like, okay, some messy stuff happened. Not everything's going perfectly. Something stupid happened. Maybe they made the wrong call. And what you do is, if you're a racial justice advocate, is you catalog all this stuff to create this illusion that the mistakes that happen here and there, first of all, you only catalog the ones that take place in a particular racial direction or sexual direction if you're a feminist or whatever. Oh, only women are getting whatever. You only document certain ones, so you cherry pick. And then you try to create this view, this belief by telling these little stories that this is a widespread, pervasive, in fact, systemic problem that defines the circumstances. So lots of that. This starts with some other crap from some other culture that she's appropriating that I probably can't pronounce. Let me see if I can get this. It looks like Kasarian Njera is a traditional greeting. Now, I've heard this from a lot of people. This is from the Maasai tribe. This is a cute little thing, right? Kasarian Njera, I don't know if I said that right. I know Tiffany Justice from Moms for Liberty says this kind of little story a lot. Is a traditional greeting of the Maasai people who inhabit Kenya and northern Uganda. So more cultural appropriation, by the way. Translated from the Ma language, it means, how are the children? On the dusty roads, on the mountain passes, and in the village marketplaces, the fabled and fierce Maasai warriors always ask and always answer this question. It is always on their minds, in their hearts, and floating in the air, as the appalling true stories above of violence targeting our children while at schools suggest. I just read 2 that were not violent, by the way. We have much to learn from these ancient people about the centrality of a society's responsibility to care for its most defenseless and vulnerable. Listen to the pulling on the heartstrings here. These stories are not aberrations. That's why there's 7 stories there, by the way, of this grand injustice, is to pull on your heartstrings and then to contextualize it this way so that they can have you emotionally open so that your rational faculty goes away. Because if your rational faculty was in place, you'd say, hell no, we're not doing this. But they need you thinking emotionally. This is not a religion of logos. It's a religion of pathos. They need you in your emotions, as we all know. These stories are not an aberration. Are not aberrations. Well, that's what I just said was going to happen. They tell 7 of the stories and then they try to say this is just how it is. Except it's probably not, and it's certainly not in most places. These stories are not aberrations, Madam Davis tells us. They are products of the structural, institutional, and individual racism on which the United States is founded. Look at that. That's a big claim. So we're not even going to unpack the whole 1619 project she just imported, but there it is. Following an introduction to the importance of education in the liberation of Black people, This chapter discusses current zero-tolerance school discipline policies and their causes and consequences. Spoiler alert, it doesn't do it very well, right? Particularly for children of color. It surveys the increasing body of evidence, most of it's really shoddy evidence or fake evidence, showing that school-based restorative justice strategies are successfully transforming zero-tolerance discipline and improving educational conditions and outcome for youth of color. Not for everybody, maybe, but for youth of color. And according to what metrics are they improving things, right? That's an open question. Or is it like in the Parkland situation where what I didn't explain earlier with the restorative justice policies is the goal of the restorative justice policy is to have all this restorative talk circle bullshit instead of discipline, right? So if the school, let's say, has money or some other status marker attached to doing this successfully, and the mark of success is there are, say, fewer suspensions, let's just say that, or expulsions, especially of children of color, the school now has an incentive not to file disciplinary reports or not to discipline people at all. Not because, or not to suspend anybody, right? So instead you sit them down and have a talk circle that doesn't achieve anything, and the kids know they can game the system and everything spirals out and you get worse and worse and worse behavior at the school. Meanwhile, the school says, look how good things are. So few kids got suspended. We almost had 0 suspensions ever since implementing restorative justice. But that's bogus. It's totally bogus. And this is, I'm not joking, this is what Why Meadow Died exposes, is how it actually works. Why is it bogus? It's very simple why it's bogus. It's completely bogus because they're just not, instead of suspending people, they're making them do talk circles. And they say, we didn't suspend anybody. Look how great we are. And if there's money attached to that, then they get money and there's this really weird incentive to do it, right? So allegedly, this is supposed to help what? It says that it can help racial disparities, right? Turns out it doesn't help everything, racial disparities, but we'll get to that. It's such baloney. It's so unbelievable how baloney it is. This chapter surveys the increasing body of evidence showing that school-based restorative justice strategies are successfully transforming zero-tolerance discipline and improving educational conditions and outcomes for youth of color. Finally, case studies from Oakland, California, and Denver, Colorado offer successful examples, yeah, right, by the way, of how restorative justice can reduce racial disparities in school discipline. She doesn't talk about the Parkland case or why Meadow died. That's very interesting, of course, right? A very successful case there. I had something else I wanted to say about this ridiculous nonsense. Oh, yeah. So she's comparing it against zero tolerance policies, right? So again, we have the classic affordance trap, as though there's nothing. Maybe zero tolerance policies are a good idea. Maybe they're a bad idea. I'm not going to adjudicate on that. It doesn't matter, right? But what she's saying is you have zero tolerance policies that are very punitive, and then you have restorative justice. Like there's nothing else you could do. And I'm not even going to say anything in between. There's a ton of stuff in between, which could even include some restorative justice practices, done differently, of course, than the woke way. I'm not saying that we even have to look there, though. There could be completely other programs that there aren't even being considered. But no, we're given an affordance, zero tolerance policies, discipline policies versus restorative justice. And so we're supposed to conclude, let's say that zero tolerance policies are really bad. I don't know if they are, but let's say that they are for the moment, for the sake of argument. Let's say that they're really bad. So let's say that they're like on a scale of like 1 to 100 of bad, that they're like 90 bad, right? So they're really bad. Well, restorative justice could be 89 bad, and it still could be therefore better by this comparison when those are the only two options on the table. And that's the depth of this analysis that we're given in this stupid book. And keep in mind that basically every school system in the country and a lot of criminal justice systems are using restorative justice primarily now, and in this way, it's a disaster. Education as a liberatory practice. What actually is the result of this, by the way, of having this everywhere and a liberatory practice? Of course, yeah, the kids are liberated, right? That's why you're seeing kids beat the crap out of teachers, beat the crap out of each other, having all this racial, like, gang turf warfare. Not to make it about this because the woke right manipulates it in a nasty way, but little white kids getting their asses beat by teams of black kids, it's a problem. It's a problem, right? And it's a liberatory practice is what we call it here. Education is a liberatory practice. Guess who they're going to invoke for education as a liberatory practice? Did you guess that she was going to talk about Paulo Freire? Oh, she's going to talk about Paulo Freire. From slavery times, oh my God, so stupid. From slavery times to the present, Black people have treasured education as liberatory. There's a big culturalist argument that could be inserted here about post Great Society. Ever since Johnson did the Great Society and we started to get the inner city ghetto problem, don't know that this is still true. From slavery times to the present, with the breakdown of the Black family not mentioned at all, Black people have treasured education as liberatory. I think that this is actually right. I think education is the best way for people to raise their level. But what you're dealing with this culturally responsive education is not education. With critical pedagogy is not education. It's radicalization. Both of those are radicalization programs posing as education. They are not, as a liberatory practice, going to get you to better places, to liberate you from the oppression of a crappy spot in society. You can tell, because you can look at the societies with the tiger moms, like East Asian, South Asian, Jewish families that push their kids hard for academic success. And guess what? They're academically and then professionally succeeding as a result. It was unlawful, she tells us, for enslaved Blacks. So this is where they tell their, mythology of how the world works that doesn't actually match how the world works, so they can whip up some fake story about what's going on. It was unlawful for enslaved Blacks to learn to read and write. And how long has it been illegal for Blacks to learn to read and write? A long damn time. Like, Blacks have been able to read and write for a long damn time now. The slaves were freed a long damn time ago. Like, it doesn't take that long to learn to read and write. This is complete nonsense. When the slave master learned his wife was teaching young Frederick Douglass to read, he at once forbade it. If you teach him how to read, there would be no keeping him. It would forever unfit him to be a slave. That's right. Upon hearing these words, Douglass had an epiphany, understanding that in that moment, that education was the path away from slavery to freedom. And that's a quote. And was the most important thing he and other slaves could do to free themselves. Douglass went on to become a leader in the anti-slavery and women's rights movements, a best-selling author, and a U.S. diplomat. Yes, he's an American hero who struck brilliant notes about the Constitution and the Declaration and the promises this country made in the lead-up to the Civil War. Author and educator Bell Hooks, how dare you put these two people back to back? Like Frederick Douglass and Bell Hooks, who doesn't even capitalize her name because of some stupid radical politics? No, I'm sorry. Author and educator Bell Hooks continues this Black tradition. No, she doesn't. She does something radically different. And this co-optation of the giants of American history into their stupid radical movement is maybe some of the most galling stuff they do. Exhorting educators to enact a revolutionary pedagogy of resistance. That is not what Frederick Douglass was talking about. That is profoundly anti-colonial and anti-racist. Oh, give me a break. That means Marxist. That's all it means is Marxist. This is education. This is education as the practice of freedom, as famed critical pedagogist Paulo Freire puts it. And it means implementing practices that both challenge curricular and pedagogical biases that reinforce systems of domination like racism and sexism, while simultaneously creating innovative ways to teach diverse groups of students. Bunch of buzzwords there, bunch of nonsense. Instead of creating pathways to liberation and opportunity, however, too many schools today are pushing children into pipelines of incarceration and violence. This is just straight woke mythology. The school to prison pipeline argument, almost all nonsense. The way that the argument works is that there's a disproportionate disciplinary circumstance on minorities, particularly Blacks, but sometimes Latinos. No mention of whether or not the kids are actually a higher probability of being a problem and therefore more likely to receive discipline. But because they get disciplined, they wash out more, they have more academic issues, they don't have as much academic success, and so on. So rather than addressing the underlying cultural issue that doesn't value education, because she lied and said that that's been something that's always been the case, well, it's not true since the Great Society, actually, Miss Davis, she steps in and says, well, obviously what it must be, or what they step in and say is obviously it must be that there's this discipline circumstance is intentional, it's racist, and it's driving these kids to not have options. Education's not really an option for them anymore because they keep getting suspended, and it's not their fault because, they grow up in a bad neighborhood, so growing up in a bad neighborhood, they don't know better, so it's not their fault, but they keep getting in trouble at school, and rather than learn their lessons, they wash out and become criminals. And so that's their argument for the school to prison pipeline of what they call incarceration and violence. But this is woke mythology for a real phenomenon that's happening, that there are very, very likely, if not completely other explanations for that are better, at least mitigating other explanations that, make it so that this is what they describe as only a small percentage of the actual problem. But it's one that gives them a large amount of leverage because they get to do the thing. They get to call the school system racist, the disciplinary system racist, and take over control of it. And that's exactly what both Davises, Angela and Fania, have made a career out of doing for 50 years. So here's where she talks about zero-tolerance school discipline. Zero-tolerance school policies criminalize children instead of educating them. Well, sometimes, but no, also not. It's not the zero-tolerance policy's job to educate students either. This is ridiculous. Creating mandatory punishments, much like the criminal justice system, so try to compare it to something, for certain rule violations, no matter how minor, these, like bringing a gun to school, these punishments often involve arrests, expulsions, or suspensions. Zero tolerance intensified in the wake of the mass shooting at Columbine High School in Colorado in the late 1990s, to the point that today school architecture mimics prison architecture. So that's called an analogy, and maybe is disanalogous. The architecture and organization of the school being, even if it's run like a prison in terms of its security, doesn't mean that what's going on inside of it's the same, or that the people coming inside of it are the same as those in prisons. This is called a disanalogy. And the environment is further prisonized, especially in low-income communities of color, with an increased police presence and surveillance. For example, use of metal detectors, security cameras, and wand searches. In recent decades, out-of-school suspensions and school-based arrests have become the norm for not only brandishing weapons and assault, yikes, but also for talking back to teachers, tardiness, playful adolescent behavior. I have a feeling that these might be a little euphemistic, right? And even temper tantrums. Over the time in which these policies have been implemented, out-of-school suspensions have increased by 100% for all children. Okay, that may or may not be true. It's not given a citation. I'm sure that Miss Fania Davis is very responsible with her statistics. These policies are rationalized as necessary to increase the safety and academic achievement, but research and reality belie this. Actually, schools with higher rates of suspensions are neither smarter nor safer than those with lower rates. Time spent learning is one of the strongest predictors of academic and social success. Research shows that removing children from the classroom contributes to missed instructional time, decreased school engagement, and diminished trust between students and adults. Now let's back up, because a classroom is the classroom full of other kids. So if you have a kid flipping out and causing dangerous disruptions, or threatening a teacher, or throwing a desk, or starting a fight, or causing any number of disruptions, and you take his ass out, yup, you're right. Guess what? He has missed instructional time, decreased school engagement, and a diminished trust between the student and the teachers, or adults, right? However, there are 29 or 30 other kids in the room who just got all of that better, right? So why does it have to be at the expense of the one who's probably black or brown? Because he was the one who threw a desk? Like, how freaking complicated is this? He's the one that punched somebody. He's the one that routinely disrupts. Talk to some teachers about the disciplinary issues that they face in their classrooms and the lack of their ability to do anything. And why do they have no ability to do anything? First of all, because the kids are, in many cases, genuinely dangerous at this point. It's hard to see how to unravel this without pretty strict policies and pretty stern countermeasures. But on the other hand, they know they can't do anything. They know because of restorative justice policies, inclusive classroom policies, and so on, they just can't do anything. So why do we have this spiraling out of control behavioral problem? Well, it's not zero tolerance policies, even if they come after the fact. Post hoc ergo propter hoc remains a fallacy. It is because of these other policies, restorative justice policies and inclusive classroom policies in particular. Again, I encourage you to read Why Meadow Died. But yeah, that is true. When you take a kid out of class, he misses instructional time. But the 29 other kids in the class get better instructional time. A lot of the kids I've heard talking today say that they wish they could learn more. They wish that their school wasn't so disruptive if there weren't these handful of kids causing problems. And once some are causing them more, start their kids. Further, being suspended once in 9th grade doubles the dropout risk and triples the chance of juvenile justice involvement within 1 year. So this is where correlation and causation come in. Being suspended does not necessarily cause that, even if it's strongly correlated. People who get suspended have a correlation that they're likely to be in these situations and within 1 year, but it doesn't mean that being suspended caused it. Maybe something else is going on, like an underlying causative factor. Like there's problems at home and the kid has more testosterone running through his body than he ever has because he's an adolescent in 9th grade. So he ends up getting suspended, and that's just the tip of an iceberg of a behavioral pattern that's a problem that's going to lead to these other problems. It's amazing how understanding that correlation and causation are not identical is very important to getting right answers about how things work. But somehow this is supposed to be like zero tolerance discipline problems or policies. Like I said, I don't know if those are the best ones. I'm not claiming they are. Somehow this is an argument against those. High suspension rates, she tells us, also cost taxpayers billions. Ooh, really? Is it the suspension rates that are causing the taxpayers billions, or is it the kids that are getting suspended? Like, where does responsibility lie here? Well, it's always, for the communist, it's always on the system, which they want to seize control of and change. According to researchers, suspensions from 10th grade alone led to 67,000 high school dropouts nationwide, resulting over the course of a lifetime in 163,000 in lost tax revenues and 364,000 in other social costs, including health and criminal justice expenses, with a cumulative cost exceeding $35 billion. Okie dokie. Racial disparities. Zero tolerance policies disproportionately, call everything racist until you control it, right? Zero tolerance policies disproportionately impact students of color. African American students are nearly 4 times as likely as their white classmates to be suspended from school for similar infractions. Well, really? Maybe. Don't trust any of their research might back that up. Black girls are suspended at a rate 8 times that of white female peers. So here's a citation actually on this. So I went and looked up the paper that this is about, talking about the African American students are nearly 4 times as likely as their white classmates to be suspended from school for similar infractions, and black girls are suspended at a rate of 8 times that of white female peers. That was a study done on a couple of preschools. Just let that sink in. That's their sample. It's a couple of preschools. Not even kindergarten. Little kids. They don't explain why. Like, this is propaganda. This is garbage. Behavioral differences do not explain the disparities. Well, they might, actually. Today, 80% of the nation's public school teachers are white. Oh, that must explain it. And consequently, implicit bias is thus more likely to occur in public schools with a majority of students of color. This is straight garbage. Implicit bias is completely discredited, and it was completely discredited before she wrote this. But they still rely on it. Because why? Because implicit bias means that people are racist in a systemic way without even meaning to be racist or knowing that they're racist. So the racism is baked into the entire fabric of the social system. And what does that mean? Well, in critical race theory, you call everything you want to control racist until you control it. So what are they wanting to control here? The entire fabric of the social system. So they have to lean on things like implicit bias, even though they're completely bogus. One school study showed that teachers treat African American students less favorably than white students. One study showed that. I'm sure one school study probably means one school as well. I don't know if there's a citation for this one or not. I didn't look it up either way. Another showed a teacher explained a white student's misconduct by reference to external factors such as family, while viewing a black student's misbehavior as attributable to internal deficits such as a lack of self-control. I mean, I went to kindergarten or in first grade, I guess, with a kid who definitely had an internal lack of self-control, who was definitely white as hell and definitely got paddled like every day. But I mean, it's one school study. That's one school. Implicit bias by individuals in the chain of school discipline decisions, particularly discretionary decisions, produces additional racially disparate outcomes. Here again, she's citing causation by a spooky force called implicit bias with dramatic alleged outcomes that she can't prove. In fact, that she doesn't prove. She just asserts this. If you need the punchline here, restorative justice is based on bogus research as it's implemented and should not be implemented in any school. The result is that children of color are punished more severely. This is tedious, right? Do we really need to keep reading this crap? No, let's skip forward to some punchlines because this is really boring. You know what this woke stuff sounds like now. Further, the presence of police officers in schools has increased with the rise of mass incarceration in the wake of school shootings to the extent of almost 30% of all U.S. schools have a police presence, resulting in referrals of hundreds of thousands of children, I'm sure. On and on it goes with this kind of, grinding stuff. Lots of stuff about these statistics that may or may not be true. I have no idea. Let's skip down to where she says restorative justice in schools. It's enough of this, like, here's the problem. You read it for yourself. It's garbage, right? But here's the problem. Here's why you need to give us grifters power over everything to change it. Restorative justice in schools. The communitarian values, we're starting off great there, and belief in the equal dignity of all human beings that are inherent to restorative justice offer hope. So some UN garbage about the inherent dignity. No, we don't need restorative justice because of the inherent dignity of all human beings when you have literally some proportion of kids who have severe personality disorders or psychopathy that's budding, that it doesn't matter how much dignity they have as a human being, their behavior is intrinsically a problem. Or where you have huge cultural mismatches, their behavior can be a severe problem. But anyway, some nonsense here. What does she say about it? So the communitarian values and belief in the equal dignity of all human beings that are inherent in restorative justice offer hope, resonating strongly with the African American tradition of education for liberation. Remember, she's already mischaracterized that too. The first documented use of restorative justice, this is some money stuff right here, by the way. The first documented use of restorative justice in schools was in 1994 when it was used in response to an assault at a high school in Queensland, Australia. Positive outcomes of pilot studies led to expansion in more than 100 schools, after which restorative justice practices in schools were adopted widely across Australia and around the globe. How's Australia doing now? Like, what's downstream from that? It has become increasingly popular in the United States as evidence mounts showing that it successfully reduces suspensions. Again, that's cooked books. Read Why Meadow Died. It reduces suspensions and expulsions and decreases racial disparities. Yeah, mostly not because it's correcting any problems, but because they aren't documenting the problems anymore. That's actually the mechanism behind how this is working. So the evidence that it works is that the program leads you to just not do the thing and then not document the things. So everything looks like it's getting better on paper, where inside the school, as anybody inside the school can tell you, it's getting rapidly worse. Further, Department of Justice and Department of Education school discipline directives during the Obama era warned that racial discrimination was not just something limited to the 1960s. It continues in our schools. These directives also mandated districts to transform exclusionary discipline policies or else face federal civil rights lawsuits. Thanks, Obama. There are growing numbers of studies establishing the effectiveness of school-based restorative justice in reducing suspensions, expulsions, and police referrals. Again, the numbers go down if you just don't do them or don't record when you do them. Again, read Why Meadow Died. You're going to find out all kinds of proof that that's how it actually worked. While improving academic outcomes and decreasing violence. That's super sus if you actually look at what's going on. How many of our schools have increased academic performance or decreased violence in the last 15 years, right? Or 20 years, I guess. For instance, according to a 2015 implementation study of whole school restorative justice in Oakland that compared schools with restorative justice to schools without from 2011 to 2014, graduation rates in restorative schools increased by 60% compared to a 7% blah, 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 right? Okay, so a bunch of statistics. Why did I just blah, blah, blah this? I tried to look up this paper because I was very curious to see what it was based on, and you can't find it anymore. It has been scrubbed. It's not on the website. It was a paper produced, I think, by Jain et al., Jain et al., specifically for the Office of Civil Rights. So this is during the Obama administration for the Office of Civil Rights, the OCR of the Department of Education. And it doesn't exist anymore. You cannot get this paper. It has been scrubbed. If you go to the website for the paper, it takes you to another one, and you just keep getting little paragraph-long descriptions. And eventually you get a link to a PDF. Those links are either dead or they take you to a Russian casino website because it's gone. You cannot. I looked everywhere for this paper for like an hour, which isn't very long technically, for research. This paper has been made hard to find or just cannot be got without emailing the authors. So I don't know what was in it or why they're hiding it, but this paper, which she considers as a major anchor for her case, this study that was published in 2014 with a report in 2015 that came out. I have that report. Actually, it's like a 90-page report. I read some of it. It's more of the same tedious stuff, but it does talk about a case where a kid brings a gun to school. Like, I don't know that stuff actually works. Turns out that you can't find the actual original report anymore. If you go to the original posting on the Oakland, Oakland something school, Unified School District website, it's just not there. It's gone, taken down. 404 no longer exists. Even without the research gold standard of double-blind randomized controlled trials, which means they don't have them, school-based restorative justice is considered a promising practice. Therefore, I guess put it in all the schools, right? With virtually all states in the nation having adopted it in some form. So there you go. She says in 2019, virtually all states have adopted this program based on no solid evidence. And the stuff that she presents is of such low quality that it's shocking. Bad theory, bad evidence, total nonsense, correlation and causation confused. Its primary, one of the primary measuring sticks for its effectiveness turns out to be that a metric that's so easy to game. You just stop. Instead of suspending kids, set them down in a talk circle. Whoa, look how many suspensions we got rid of. Brilliant, right? Very few studies, she says, however, focus on the potential of restorative justice to reduce racial disparities in school discipline. So this is the typical CRT grift. We have all this evidence showing that it works, but we didn't focus specifically on race. Give us money so that we can go do that research. Oakland, California, and Denver, Colorado are leading the way. Now, this is fantastic right here. Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth, RJOY, Oakland, California. Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth, RJOY, RJOY, is a national thought leader in practicing restorative justice in ways that emphasize its intersections with racial justice and honor its indigenous ethos. Launched in California's first urban school-based restorative justice pilot at an Oakland middle school in 2006. This school in this book is not named. Fania Davis does not name the school. The school is called Cole Middle School. I hunted this down. I looked this up. Cole Middle School did this in 2006. Okay, so we'll come back to that. The pilot used restorative conversations and circles proactively to create a culture of connectivity and responsively provide an alternative to exclusionary school discipline. Suspension rates plummeted by 87% during the first 2 years. Violence and teacher attrition were eradicated, and academic outcomes increased. By 2010, with youth organizing and our Joy's advocacy and assistance, the Oakland Unified School District adopted restorative justice as an official policy and committed significant staff and financial resources to fund these efforts. Now, this sounds like fraud because you know what you didn't read here? Okay, so they implemented it in 2006. What happened? There was a whole bunch less suspension rates. Of course, they might just not have been recording them during the first 2 years. Violence and teacher attrition were eradicated and academic outcomes increased. That may or may not be true, but so 2006, so 2 years would be the 2006-7 and 7-8 school years. And so that's by the end of 2008. What they don't tell you is that Cole Middle School, what she doesn't say is that Cole Middle School closed permanently in 2009, and that in the years relevant to the study, it was rapidly declining in enrollment. The school was dying when they implemented this, and it did not save the school. The school collapsed. It closed the next year after 2 years of this experiment were being run. I don't know if that explains the 87% drop in suspensions that they lost their students because the Cole Middle School of Oakland, California closed, but she doesn't mention that that's what actually happened to the school. I had to go look that up separately. Let's carry on with her for this section, and then I'm going to read to you directly from the Cole Middle School thing. Now, nearly 40 OUSD restorative school nearly 40 Oakland Unified School District restorative schools implement a wide range of restorative practices, but not Cole Middle School because it closed, that both proactively strengthen community and responsively repair harm. How's Oakland doing, by the way? Let's just judge this by its... How's Oakland doing 15 years down the road from this little experiment, 20 years down the road from this little experiment? Is Oakland doing okay? Is Oakland a haven of good civilian behavior, or is it a criminal-infested hellhole where the first ever In-N-Out burger had to close and God knows how many department stores had to leave because of the rampant, unending crime? Because they had to close an In-N-Out burger in Oakland because it was too dangerous for people to work there because of the crime. This has been doing fantastic. 15 years later, 20 years later, this is what we get. Because now 40 OUSD restorative schools are doing this crap. These practices include restorative conversations, conferencing in circles, mediation, and a strong student-led component. Restorative practices are also often co-implemented with other school climate strategies, such as positive behavioral intervention systems, that's PBIS, which you've probably heard of if you're in this fight, and initiatives coming out of the Offices of Equity and African American Male Achievement. I'm sure those are great. From 2012 to 2017, overall suspension rates in OUSD dropped by nearly 55%, from 7.4% to 3.3%. That's fantastic. How many kids dropped out of school? How many did you just stop suspending people? Did you change your policy on suspension to make it really hard to suspend people, or just not do it, or just don't suspend black kids so the numbers don't look bad? For the Obama numbers, right? Though disparities remain, the black-white discipline gap narrowed from 12.1% to 6.4%, or a 47% decrease. Okay, fine. So why did those numbers change? Was it because the Obama administration and these NGOs were giving you money when you made sure the numbers looked good? Oakland, California wouldn't be that corrupt, would it? The Latino-white gap narrowed from 3.4% to 1.4%, a 59% gap reduction. So these deracinated, meaningless statistics don't tell us whether the programs are working because we don't know why the numbers changed. Notably, an important motivation to adopt restorative justice district-wide as official policy, as stated in the 2010 school board resolution, was the legal imperative to address racial disparity in school discipline. Oh, so the state came down and said, or maybe it was the federal government under Obama came down and said, you have to address racial disparities, and here's a program that'll allow you to do it. By what? By basically don't record, if the Wymeadow died research is right, just don't record what happens in the schools anymore. And look, the disparities are gone. They're not even on paper anymore. The U.S. Department of Education launched an investigation against the Oakland School District for civil rights violations and school discipline. And as part of the settlement agreement, the district agreed, among other things, to use restorative justice to reduce the disparate rate of arresting, suspending, and expelling black students compared to their white counterparts. So Obama's Department of Education did a shakedown to force them to adopt a program that has turned their community into a criminal hellhole. Fantastic. So yeah, obviously it works, right? I mean, just look how good Oakland is now. So let's go to this real document here, right? Let's skip the BS. Let's actually go to the document that's cited here, Implementing Restorative Justice at Cole Middle School. Turns out this is a 40-page document that has a lot to it. We're not going to read very much of this. It's extremely, even just the part, there's a lot of parts. Just the part about Cole Middle School is very long, and I'm not going to read all of it, but I want to give you an introduction to what's going on at Cole Middle School, and then I want to tell you what happened at Cole Middle School, other than the fact that Cole Middle School closed. Implementing Restorative Justice at Cole Middle School. This is not part of the book, Fania Davis's idiotic book. This is the actual report that she cites. In this section, we document the origins and implementation of the Restorative Justice Program at Cole Middle School, as well as the community's perception of the program and its effectiveness. In 2005, Cole's principal and a disciplinary case manager became disillusioned with traditional discipline policies, which they believed were detrimental both to the students and to the school's culture. After discussions with teachers and staff about how to implement a restorative justice program at Cole, the school petitioned the Oakland Unified School District and received permission to begin a pilot restorative justice program. That's what Fania Davis was talking about. A local nonprofit restorative justice organization, Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth, RJOY, contributed its expertise in developing the program. To establish a restorative justice culture at the school, all teachers and staff took part in the initial training sessions. At first, students were only involved as participants in disciplinary circles. As teachers and staff learned more about restorative justice, they extended its philosophy and methodology to non-disciplinary community-building activities. 1 year after the onset of the pilot program, Oakland Unified School District expanded its support by authorizing the disciplinary case manager to devote her work time to implementing the program more broadly. Restorative justice became the primary discipline program at the school beginning in 2007. The disciplinary case manager worked full-time on restorative justice as an RJOY employee after applying, so RJOY sounds like one of these grift organizations, after applying for and receiving funding from the city of Oakland. Teachers and staff continued to receive training, and the use of restorative justice for discipline and building community expanded to involve an increasing number of students and parents. 25 students took an elective restorative justice class offered to all 7th graders and to some 8th graders. In the school year beginning in 2008, a second restorative justice leader joined the program, volunteering at first and later receiving a stipend. During this time, most of the staff attended training sessions or participated in circles, but restorative justice leaders and those who were enthusiastic about the program were the most involved. In addition, about 8 students participated in an elective group that learned more about restorative justice and how to lead circles. They volunteered at a nearby elementary school to help the students with conflicts during lunch and recess. While restorative justice was being implemented, the school was gradually closing because of declining enrollment. In 2006, no new 6th graders were admitted to take the place of the graduating 8th grade students. The 2007 school year saw a 7th grade and a single 8th grade class. By 2008, Cole's last year, only the 8th grade class remained. In 2006, 7, and 8, Cole's enrollment was 225, 152, and 75, respectively. Let's get a calculator real quick here and see what 75 divided by 225 is. Let's ask my calculator. You'd think I'm a math major. 75 divided by 225 is, ladies and gentlemen, 33%. Therefore, 1/3. So 2/3 of the students are gone. What did Fania Davis say the number was? How much did suspensions drop by? 87%. So a little better. So 5 out of 6 suspensions were canceled. Meanwhile, 2 out of 3 students weren't there anymore. Amazing. So then there's this long description of what the practices were. I'm not going to get into it. It's all bogus anyway. It doesn't work. That why they implemented it to address particular concerns. I'm trying to skip through student and teacher perceptions of the restorative justice program. Many students and teachers felt the atmosphere at Cole was more peaceful, with fewer fights among students and better behavior in the classroom relative to earlier years. Some teachers believed that there were fewer instances of harmful behavior at the school, such as students acting out in the classroom or showing disrespect because of restorative justice. Some argued that the decline in conflict was more a function of time. The school was smaller, the students knew one another better, and fewer new students were jockeying to establish their place in the school. Others, however, directly attributed the decline in conflict to the restorative justice process. So the study itself says they don't even know, okay, so things were perceived maybe to get better, but they don't know why. It might just be because the school was falling apart and shrinking. Some students reported that the circles permitted classmates to express their feelings, thus preventing conflicts that might otherwise occur. None of this actually turns out to be a very strong endorsement for restorative justice. Parent perceptions were also likewise kind of weak, although a small number of parents received restorative justice trainings, often in one-day or weekend workshops, and spoke positively about it. However, none of the interviewed parents mentioned implementing the training beyond their interaction with the school. Some students liked it. Some thought it to be largely a waste of time. Figure 1 shows the vast majority of students agreed that restorative justice was being used at Cole Middle School, with 85% of students on average agreeing with the sentiment. Most agreed strongly, saying it was very true. So the students were vaguely aware that it was happening. Most of the students thought restorative justice was helping things at Cole. On average, 83% of the students believed restorative justice was helping at Cole, and 83% also said restorative justice was reducing fighting at school. However, most students said this was only sort of true. It's all like this. Almost all students agreed that restorative justice was helping relationships with other students at Cole Middle School, with 91% agreeing that it was helping their relationships with other students, and 83% agreeing that restorative justice was helping young people in general get along at Cole. However, support was, again, mild, with most students saying it was only sort of true. Slightly more than half of the students reported using restorative justice with friends, with 62% on average agreeing that they used restorative justice with their friends. However, it is likely that the students were commenting on friends who were also at Cole and thus required to participate in the restorative justice program. Students thought restorative justice had a more limited impact with adults. Students generally felt restorative justice helped relationships with teachers, with 70% agreeing. However, only 39% felt it helped their relationship with the principal. Students overwhelmingly said that restorative justice training did not transfer to their involvement with parents. Only 9% said that they used restorative justice with their parents. However, 30% said it had helped relationships with their parents. So it's all pretty wishy-washy evidence. But remember why it was brought in. It was brought in the wake of the Columbine shooting. That's where it all started, in a similar incident in Australia. Not a shooting, I don't think. It was brought in as a point of interest because of school shootings, violence in schools, and so were the policies of the zero tolerance, right? So these are kind of two questions. How do we address this? So this is kind of an interesting side point about Cole Middle School, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, which was a dying school, which was the country's pilot program, first the Oakland Unified School District, and then the entire nation, including the Parkland School where, what is that? Is it Marjorie Stoneman Douglas or something like that school in Parkland, Florida? Including that school where the horrific shooting occurred, and the book Why Meadow Died was based on that, and was taking it as the Max Eden's research showed, AEI fellow, showed that That was the kind of like test case for the country, and it's this horrible school shooting happens. Well, what happened at Cole Middle School? I think you can probably guess where this story is about to go. The immediacy of violence. They tell us, remember, 2008 is the year the school died. The immediacy of violence was highlighted during an incident in the fall of 2008, so in the school's last year, when a new student brought a gun into the classroom, which accidentally discharged. Oh shit, there was accidentally a school shooting. No one was injured, but the students, their parents, and teachers were shaken. The school held circles for students and adults during school hours and hosted an after-school event that drew a large number of students and concerned family members. Restorative justice did not stop the kid bringing a loaded gun to school that he accidentally fired in the classroom. A number of restorative justice procedures were used during the after-school event, including participants sitting in a circle and using a talking piece. Students, their parents, and school administrators appreciated the event, which helped some attendees come to terms with their feelings and feel safer. However, the event raised expectations, and some attendees were disappointed by what they felt was insufficient follow-up communication and inadequate changes in school policy to prevent future incidents at the school. What a surprise. They have restorative justice. They don't need it. Turns out they didn't need it anyway. The school closed. But, overall, though, the teachers and students appreciated the event, and parents were glad to be included in the process. That's all they can say about a kid bringing a gun to school and accidentally discharging it in the classroom. Except that they didn't really do enough. So this is, according to Fania Davis, this is the pilot program for the country we just heard about. She doesn't name the school, because then you could actually go look this up without doing some legwork. Not that it's real hard. She cites it, and you can go find the citation. But the first citation you find doesn't exist. And then this citation you can go dig up, and you can read this yourself. But she doesn't elaborate on any of this. For example, suspension rates plummeted by 87% during the first 2 years. There were only 2 years because the school closed after that. She doesn't mention that the school closed after that. She also doesn't mention that there was no sixth grade in the second year, and no seventh grade, in the third year. I've got my numbers all wrong. In the first year after the program was implemented, there was no sixth grade. In the second year after the program was implemented, there was no sixth or seventh grade. It was just an eighth grade class. And then in the year after that, there was no school. And it wasn't a big number anyway. By the year 2008, the school had reduced its overall capacity by 66%, 67%. And we are talking about an 87% drop in suspension rate. Now, we know that the standard MO for a restorative justice program is that sometimes when you would have suspended somebody, you make them sit in a circle and talk. Like, I don't know, maybe after a gun goes off in class that the kid brought with him, make them sit in a circle and talk. This is the pilot program for the country in restorative justice based on fraudulent theory, crap analysis, and then you have this openly communist activist named Fania Davis, sister to Angela Davis, being the one who's pushing this crap. And the reason that it expanded wasn't because it worked at all. All this is covered up in the book, right? It wasn't because it worked. The reason it expanded is because the U.S. Department of Education under Barack Obama launched an investigation against a CRT investigation, guys, against the Oakland School District for civil rights violations in school discipline. They were strongly incentivized to use restorative justice as a tool by which they could paper over the fact that a lot of the black kids going to the school were delinquency problems. We could talk about the school she presents here in Denver. I didn't go follow up on all of that. It's so shocking here, but it's all similar. So we're going to skip that example and talk about tips for reducing racial disparities in school discipline. I have one for you. Don't record it. The following vignette offers insight into suggestions for ways to reduce school discipline racial disparities. Not to get fewer discipline problems. The goal of restorative justice with this racial twist is not necessarily to get fewer disciplinary incidents. It is to reduce school discipline racial disparities. You want to make sure that there are fewer incidents that proportionally among minority students. An Oakland-based restorative justice consultant attended a meeting of school administrators in a nearby large school district located in a mostly upscale white county with pockets of high poverty schools in communities of color. Typical story that they always tell. Historically, these schools had high levels of exclusionary discipline coupled with large racial disparities. 3 administrators tasked with drafting plans to address these issues read their plans aloud, whether proposing interventions such as mental health services, peer mediation, character development, or conflict resolution programs. Each plan focused on student behavioral deficits. Colleagues gave positive feedback, but the restorative justice consultant remained silent. When asked about his opinion, he responded with a question: who makes the decisions that result in high levels of racially disproportionate suspensions, expulsions, and arrests? After a long silence, one administrator finally admitted, "We do." Nodding, the consultant then asked, "And what systemic factors are involved?" So you see, here is the CRT grift. Aha, we found that there are racial disparate impacts going on at your school. Disparate impact is occurring. How did that happen? Who's responsible? Oh, we are. Cue the guilt. This is a problem we apparently have to solve. It's a made-up problem, by the way. The CRT explanation for all disparities is racism. It takes off the table any other possibility. Every other possible explanation goes away. Therefore, the conclusion that you're supposed to draw is we must have racism. Therefore, there's a racism problem and we have to solve a racism problem. There might not be a racism problem, guys. There are other explanations. CRT has put you under a magic spell and tricked you into thinking racism's the only explanation. So we do. Now they have the guilt. Nodding along. They're nodding. The consultant then asked, and what systemic factors are involved? So what they've discovered is we are responsible for disparate impacts in punitive discipline at the school. It's our fault. And the guy says, well, what are the systemic factors? In other words, analyze this with me through CRT. They just got grifted is what happened. And, quote, punitive discipline policy, school segregation, school financing, and teacher quality are some. He replied that while the proposals to alter student behavior might help, little will change without additional interventions addressing implicit bias in student-teacher relationships, as well as district efforts to alter policies in the larger institutional context that maintains racialized hierarchies. In other words, more CRT grifting, including implicit bias training, is going to be necessary. I offer 3 specific strategies to implement restorative justice in schools in a way that will reduce racial disparities. Again, the point isn't to reduce incidents, it's to reduce racial disparities. 1, simultaneously address relationships, institutional racism, and implicit bias. I'm not going to read all this nonsense. We all know what grift and BS is going to be there. I'm going to save our time. 2, develop district community collaboration. So again, what you're going to have here, district community collaboration, is that you're going to have, let's just read this one paragraph. Systems interventions create the opportunity for educators and school-based restorative justice practitioners to collaborate with community-based groups like Padres y Jóvenes Unidos and Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth. In other words, create partnerships with the activist NGOs that are trying to transform your district with woke bullshit. That's the solution here, right? And 3, develop district university partnerships. So same thing again. Another effective strategy to transform zero tolerance and interrupt the racialized school-to-prison pipeline, which she's just asserting is real, is to enter into partnerships with area universities. Oh, yeah, super woke, right? To develop and monitor data and conduct rigorous, research on school discipline and racial disparities. A good example is the researcher practitioner partnership between the University of Denver Graduate School of Social Work and the Office of Social Emotional Learning at Denver Public Schools. Yeah, I'm sure that's going really well there. Do I have to say more to this audience? I don't think so. The partners work closely together, regularly meeting over the course of the school year, both to track race-related school discipline data as well as develop specific trainings, coachings, and relational interventions to reduce exclusionary discipline and narrow racial disparities. They also monitor the impact of these interventions, continually modifying them to improve the efficacy. That's called how you keep your consulting grift alive even after the initial bid. Additional goals of the partnership are to use research to inform local policy programs and practices, and to work with policymakers and practitioners to identify and implement effective prevention and intervention strategies. Conclusion: being a warrior and a healer in the context of school-based restorative justice. So we're back to the really stupid parts. Being a warrior and a healer in the context of school-based restorative justice practice means practicing with heightened and active awareness of our own bias, implicit or explicit, and of systemic factors in our schools that perpetuate harm. A few of the many such factors include financing disparities for schools and communities of color. There's a grift. Tracking and special education placements, the school-to-prison pipeline, and racial disparities in discipline. It also means creating school cultures of care, connectivity, and healing. In other words, it doesn't say anything meaningful. So the conclusion here is, if you read Why Meadow Died, you come away with a very strong impression that the restorative justice practices that have been foisted on our schools, not least by Obama in the relevant years, which I think the Parkland School District in Florida accepted that under Obama, probably pressure from Obama, is all based off of nonsense. It's all based off of crackpot theory, culturally appropriated and misinterpreted ideas from other cultures that aren't even ours, which isn't to say they're necessarily bad. It's just that they may not fit. Just because something came from Africa doesn't mean it's great for an Oakland school. Like, there's no connection there. Oh, it's indigenous people did it, so stick it in an urban school. Like, yeah, a fucking fantastic idea. Who thought that up, right? And then, oh yeah, before you do it, pass it through a communist lens and make sure that communist NGOs running some kind of an educational grift program with pressure from the Obama administration make sure that it gets implemented. All right, so I digress. The point is that if you read Why Meadow Died, you come away with a very strong impression that the reason that we have so much violence in schools, including so many damn school shootings, not least I would guess probably from these trans shooters that are all the new rage, is because of restorative justice and, to a lesser degree, inclusive classroom policies. Restorative justice doesn't work. It's time to get rid of it. It's time for us to rethink this. The Department of Education, in my opinion, should be going after this. And I did mention that. I filed, as a lot of you would have seen on Twitter, but I also sent it to them directly, to the Ed Transition team. I sent a report directly with 30 priorities that I felt that the Department of Education should take on. And one of them was that restorative justice, and secondarily, the inclusive classroom policy, that one's a little more complicated because of the disability thing, need to be revisited. And in fact, restorative justice needs to be put at a very low level of priority. It's not to say that some restorative activities can never be used, but we certainly shouldn't be doing it this way, and we certainly shouldn't be doing it after this CRT grift that Fania Davis has put forth. Again, this is one of the dumbest books I've ever read. And I also said the same thing, that we should be scaling back and being more thoughtful and careful about how we apply inclusive classroom policies, and anything that this Department of Education can do, A, in terms of creating the necessary reports, but B, in terms of investigations and federal funding mechanisms being tied to this, are strongly advised. So now, because Moms for Liberty University decided that they were going to be doing a month-long study, so join in on their study if you want to learn more, into restorative justice. They're doing a book club in March that's going to read Why Meadow Died and then talk about it. So go look into that if you're interested. I encourage it. I encourage you to read that book either way. I thought it would be a great time to step in and do a podcast about the disaster of restorative justice and our overwhelming need as a nation to move away from it. And how are we going to do that? Well, I think that what we need to do is we need to just start talking about it. Of all of the things in education, we talk about critical pedagogy a lot. We talk about CRT in the classroom, talk about obviously drag queen story hour. We talk about all of this stuff. We talk about SEL. We're talking about the whole school WISC model, whole school, whole community, whole child, WSCC. We're talking about all kinds of different topics within the educational domain that the woke have kind of forced in. We're talking about education for sustainable development. These are words that I hear some of. That one we could talk a lot more about because we want to get that crap out of our schools. The UN agenda does not belong in our schools, by the way. UNESCO does not belong in our schools, by the way. We talk about comprehensive sexuality education, does not belong in our schools. That's Planned Parenthood shouldn't be in our schools either. We talk about the medicalization of the school. We talk about all of that. And we don't talk nearly enough about restorative justice. So I think a lot more parents having a lot more awareness, making a lot more noise about restorative justice might end up putting kind of some attention on a Department of Education, which currently still exists at the time of this recording at least, to take on restorative justice to the degree that they can and to start making it a national issue. If you were to, in fact, if people have done this, people ask me, James, if you had to name one thing, what would you name as the leading cause for the crazy rise in violence, which injures students and teachers, but also destroys the learning environment of the school? There's no psychological safety. Classrooms are out of control in a lot of cases, not all cases, but they're way more than they used to be. And then also school shootings. If you were to say, what is the major cause of this? I would say without hesitation that it's the restorative justice programming that they've been doing, not since the pilot was not, as the book Why Meadow Died, reports, it was not actually in those Florida school districts, including the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas School in Parkland. It in fact goes further back to Oakland. And the real pilot program was a middle school that collapsed while it was going on, that involved a kid bringing a gun and discharging it in a classroom while it was going on. There's absolutely no reason to believe that this program works. There's absolutely no reason to believe that it was, in fact, adopted more widely for good reasons. It looked like the Obama administration leaned on schools to adopt it as a mechanism, as Max Eden and I think as Andrew Pollack again, but definitely Max Eden have reported in Why Meadow Died. It looks like the Obama administration leaned very hard on school districts starting in 2008 and 9, as early as that, but certainly by 14 and 15, to start implementing restorative justice as a way to paper over racial disparities. In other words, as a CRT-infused mechanism to cook the books so that they could tie whatever metrics and whatever money in schools to race and racial disparity, the claim that our schools are systemically racist and need to be transformed. Fania Davis's ridiculous book, The Little Book of Race and Restorative Justice, Black Lives Healing and U.S. Social Transformation, fits squarely into that. And I want to remind you, if I can find it again quickly enough, what she says, the real point is, let me just read that part one more time to you, what restorative justice in her mind is really about. It is ultimately, she says, in her view, to take the next step on the evolutionary journey of reimagining what it means to be human. I'm sorry, that's a religious project that has absolutely no place in our schools. To the degree that restorative justice is built around that agenda, it has no place in our schools, and there's no way it can solve the problems that it's sold as being able to solve. So it's time for us to cut away from restorative justice. If you can, join in with the Moms for Liberty University project this month, or in March, I don't know what month you're listening to this in, but March 2025, or go back and look up those materials, look into Why Meadow Died, and try to get informed. If you're interested in education, talking about education, this should be a big issue. If you care about the violence and the spiraling violence in our schools, you definitely need to get informed on restorative justice and make it your boogeyman. We've got to hammer this issue, and hopefully this new Department of Education can make a big difference with our help. So look into it. Thanks for listening.